Hi everybody and welcome to this week's edition of Straight Talk with Bren O'Brien and Tim Rowe from The Straight, brought to you by Darley and Inglis, our sponsors. Today, a New South Wales push to get 4 Group 1s added to the Australian calendar. Does Australia need to revisit the weight allowance for mares? It's AGM and broad election season in club and regulator land. We have an extended chat with recent Group 1 trainer and Australian Trainers Association President Troy Corstens. In breeding, we pay tribute to Fastnet Rock, a dispute over Australian insurance payment, and a bumper week at Keeneland. Finally, in wagering, we reflect on a big week's industry discussion in Melbourne, mull whether online in-play betting might find favour, and ponder the possibility of wagering advertising reform. Tim, it's been a big week for us, having spent a couple of days in Melbourne at the Backing the Punt conference. We'll get onto that in a bit, but firstly, hopes of a cohesive Australian approach to the pattern seem doomed. 4 New South Wales races have been put forward for consideration by the Asian Pattern Committee for upgrade. We're probably surprised that there were 4. We probably knew the Golden Eagle was one of them or whatever else. How have you read this story, Tim? Obviously, a story you broke yesterday. Where do things sit at the moment, do you feel?
Well, first of all, I should just give a shout out to our colleague Warwick Barr, who's been holding the fort while we've been busy working hard. It's very difficult down at those conferences. But on the more serious issues, the pattern, well, four races, as you said, the Golden Eagle, the Russell Balding, that was no surprise that they want to put those races forward, but also the Premier, 2 weeks before the Everest, and the Apollo, which was sort of the first up race in the autumn for, good weight for age milers and 2,000 metre horses. Yeah, interesting that they've been put forward. There was a meeting with the Asian Pattern Committee last night. It's only the time of recording, I haven't had a chance to follow up and see if I can find out what actually happened at that meeting. Transparency, as we know, isn't a strong suit of these committees, and that's their right. But it'd be nice to know what's actually happened and whether it gets over the line. I think there is there obviously is a lot of discontent within the Australian industry and certainly internationally, about what's going on here and the lack of a pattern. There was my understanding that the Everest and the All-Star Mile was upgraded to Group 1 last year, probably despite ignoring the protocols in place, on the belief that, or assurances that Racing Australia would have a working pattern this year, by March. And that clearly hasn't happened. There was a meeting last week that didn't go ahead. So we're a long way from any resolution, I think, or certainly an obvious one. There's just too many personalities involved and opposing views, it seems.
Is there a danger here, Tim, that this becomes an international issue, that this blows up internationally, and Australia's, the strength of Australia's pattern, or the status of Australia's pattern is that, in book 1 of that, the whole thing, like the way that it's catalogued and worked out, is there a danger that Australia starts place in that is under threat because of the lack of a proper approach around this stuff, do you believe?
I think there can be. There's a lot of discontent out there internationally. Australia's looks bad, and like it or not, we're a state-based racing industry, but it is a global sport, as someone said at the conference just this week. And the pattern and the black type is a big part of that in terms of bloodstock values and ranking races and different things like that. I don't think it'd be a good thing that Australia has potentially local Group 1s or local stakes races. On Sunday there's a local Group 1 in Malaysia, but that doesn't count for anything. I don't even think it's a listed race internationally. So, and Singapore used to have that where they went it alone and local Group 1s and they're listed races. So I don't think we want to go down that path. There's a lot of investment internationally in Australia from the Coolmores, Godolphins, Yulong, of course. So, and the pattern and valuing horses and is important. Is there a major part of that?
Yeah, and it just seems, and I guess probably the other aspect which is probably disappointing about the timing of this, Tim, we had this discussion 12 months ago. It's probably later this month, but it's sort of October, when it's sort of early October when this blew up last year. The 12 months to resolve this, or at least find a way forward on this stuff. And we're at the start of the spring, we're having the same furiously annoying arguments again about Group 1 races and where they sit. Now, people might say, it doesn't matter if it races a Group 1 or whatever else. But if we can't sort out a basic feature calendar, what does it say to the rest of the sporting world, let alone the rest of the racing world, about how we're setting out our shop?
Well, that's exactly right, Brent. As I said, the personalities involved, and this is a state, the lack of a national approach to these things. I think I might have said it last week. we can't have one strong state and expect the industry to thrive. Even if, we're talking about New South Wales, they can have, if they have a lot of the black type races, and say those races got upgraded and they have 3 sprint races, and as someone told me, that can't have the upside with no downside. There needs to be some downgrades as well. I think that's one of the issues, certainly local or domestically, and some of the people internationally that are looking back at or looking on Australia, going, well, hang on, why have you got so many Group 1s? Some need to be downgraded, and we know some of the PREs agree with that. But Melbourne, for instance, have got is it 4 Group 1 sprints in the autumn? The William Reid or the Oakley Plate or something. Which ones get downgraded? Memsies, CF4s, all those sort of races. There's talks about that, and you did your 50 Group 1s last week, which resonated.
Yeah, and I thought, it's interesting seeing the Apollo on that list of possible upgrades, because we need more 1400-metre weight for age Group 1 races in Australia, like a hole in the head. But anyway, we'll move on now from that. We're talking probably another, actually, sort of, I guess, long-running, sort of boiling issue in racing sort of been dealt with, which is probably, again, a bit like the pattern, the historical sort of structure that's existing now, despite probably times changing. And it's an article that was brought to, an issue that was brought to province by an article from Matt Stewart about the 2 kilo mares weight for age, or mares and fillies weight for age allowance. We talked about this a lot. It's been talked about for 20 years, since Mackay Diva went to a Melbourne Cup and probably got better off that. Obviously not weight for age, but they still got an allowance under handicap conditions. She would have carried 2 kilos more in that last Melbourne Cup. Mackay Diva Stakes, obviously, this weekend. The man who rode her to those famous victories, Glenn Boss, just believes these mares are now physically much stronger compared to physically, there's much less difference between them and what goes on for the geldings. Geldings used to get a lot more treatment with steroids, which made them probably a lot stronger, a lot more robust. Now we've sort of got these monster mares, and we have a series of horses, Sunline, Mackay Diva, Black Caviar, Winx, and Via Sistina now, that are dominating races. Very elegant, obviously a very dominant horse as well. Do you see merit in this argument, Tim, that we need to have a look at this? Because it seems to me that it may be skewing some of the elite racing in Australia, where we've got these elite racing mares. We're not necessarily talking about coming through the grades, but certainly when we get to this elite level, if you're competing best against best, then why should they have this advantage?
Well, I'm kind of smart enough to work out the whether it's 1.5 kilos like it is in some jurisdictions in the north, or 2 kilos, or 1, whatever. Some might argue it's 3. But what I will say is, I don't think we should be handicapping for the elites. They are champion horses, but you got to think there's tens of thousands of races run around the country each week, or for each month and for the year. That if we reduce that 2 kilos, does that give the geldings an advantage? I'm not sure, but I don't think we should be handicapping for the very small percentage of horses that are champions. And we do have some elite mares at the moment, Autumn Glows and Via Sistinas and things like that. But that's a small percentage of the horse population. And in those champions, we talk about Mackay Diva, Winx, Black Caviar, that's one a decade. So, and Sunline before that. So I'm not sure where it sits, but I'm not convinced it needs to change necessarily. And John Massara had that in Matt Stewart's article, was of the same view. And so, I'm sitting on the fence a little bit, but I don't think it's a major issue. If you think it's a problem, bet, they've got an advantage, bet more on the mares.
Yeah, I guess we're trying to determine who the best horse are. And let's face it, Via Sistina still wins the Cox Plate by probably 7 lengths with 2 kilos. It doesn't make that much of a difference. But I think my only part of the argument, which as part of this as well, is that this system sort of emerged at a time where you have to encourage people to race their mares. Because, and racing at Group 1 level against other horses made it more, in order to sort of see the best mares, we need to give them an advantage as well, to encourage people to come through and nominate their horses. Probably less so these days with a lot more mares Group 1s, Tim, which probably puts in a situation where obviously they can compete against the mares, get their Group 1 race, get the stamp beside them. As you spoke before, there's value in that from a bloodstock perspective. I do see a point around this, though. I do see a point where, and maybe there needs to be studies done into how things have changed, but we seem to have these powerful, strong mares that are able to compete at the same level, yet to have that 2 kilo advantage. And if you believe in weights and measures, then you believe that, it will have an impact. So I think it's something that will bubble along and still be talked about. Of course, the problem is if you do then have a disincentive for mares to compete at that Group 1 level and they don't compete, then we're going to have a lot of mares being retired at 4 to go to stud. And not much different to what we have with the colts right now. And so then we end up with Cox Plates and Queen Elizabeth Stakes, and there's good Group 1 races being just dominated by geldings, which probably, it's probably a net negative for the industry. So it's an interesting point. One will probably bubble along as well. Just a quick mention, it tends to be this time of year we talk about board elections. No election in the MRC this year. Now, you recall this time last year we spoke a lot about John Kanga's sort of rise to prominence and then to the chairmanship of the MRC, hard fought and bitter election battle, court, recriminations, whatever else. Well, this year, the electoral process, democracy took place via a press release, which was nobody else nominated. John Kanga and 2 other board members have been reappointed. It seems remarkable. Certainly, there's been a massive wave of change at the MRC, and that's happened. We've also had a situation where the Racing New South Wales board positions officer with 2 possible vacancies from December this year. The New South Wales government have put out positions of interest for those 2 spaces around that. Tony Shepherd and Darry Charney's positions both up for renewal, whether they're renewed or whether they find someone else to fill those positions. Of course, the Racing New South Wales board are all often under scrutiny. We've got the Racing Victoria board, which operates in a bit of a different manner. There are 2 vacancies of the Racing Victoria board at the moment. I've reached out to the state government to try to get a view on timelines and processes and the panel they'll appoint, but I haven't heard back from them yet. When they do, you'll hear it first on the strike. Tim, we'll go now to an interview we did with Troy Corstens yesterday. I had a great chat with Troy about obviously his recent success with Barrackeel, but also his new position in charge as president of the Australian Trainers Association. And joining us on Straight Talk is multiple Group 1 winning trainer and president of the Australian Trainers Association, Troy Corstens. Thanks for your time, Troy.
Thanks, Bren. Thanks for having me on.
Big weekend for the stable, starting off, obviously with Barrackeel winning. I mean, it must have been quite validating to see him get that win at that level. Because obviously hasn't been the most straightforward of horses, but it's all, anytime you get a Group 1 winner, it's nice. But I tell you what, when you get one you have to work hard for, it must feel good.
Spot on. And you're exactly right. The work that's gone in with this horse and the time that he's taken just makes you appreciate it that little bit more. And I always say that winning a Group 1, I say that having my son, my firstborn son, was the best feeling I've ever had in my life. And then I've got 2 daughters after that, but I reckon a Group 1's nearly equal to the first to having my son. So that's how good a feeling it is.
Yeah. Any discussions around the Everest with him, Troy?
I've had a couple of little conversations with some slot holders, nothing in depth. I think it's a very unique year, Bren. I reckon that with Kaying Rising coming, it's made it basically everybody thinks that they're racing for second. I disagree, but everybody thinks that they're racing for second and no doubting that he's an unbelievable horse. And maybe we are, but I think everybody's just sitting back, making sure that they've got their I's dotted and their T's crossed before they lock anything in, because this year it is so important to get that right, probably.
And how do you go about, if negotiations step up, it is, as you say, an interesting year where generally the slot holders understandably want to protect their position, $700,000 a year, give or take. But if you've got a nice horse, but maybe you think you're fifth third, running second, third backwards, do you stay in Melbourne and things like that? Does that come into conversation?
Yeah, very much so, Tim. I think it's a very poignant question and something that you really need to look at. Do you want to risk that and go up there if you think you're going to be running for second? And the slot holders are probably thinking that because they don't go into it with the passion that a horse trainer does, that they've got a horse going into it. So, and I get it. I totally get it. They're very clever guys that have got these slots and they don't want to just hand them away. And if they are just racing for second, they want to make sure that they get second right.
How do you manage him as a horse? Is there a concern, is there a horse that because of his obviously didn't start till he was 5 and had to work through him, is there a sense with him that it's got to be the right situation to get into a race like the Everest? You got to actually step him into it. You can't just sit there and take him for granted. You can't just turn the key and off he goes.
A long time ago, Bren, when we probably after last preparation, I was clear and my mind was set only on the Manikato. I didn't know how we were going to get to the Manikato, and I wasn't really worried how we were going to get to the Manikato, but I wanted to just get to the Manikato, and I think we've done that now. So to think about an Everest, it probably makes a lot of sense anything other than the Everest, I wouldn't even contemplate. I'd probably stop after the Manikato and give him a break. But if an Everest slot pops up, I'd have to be a little bit stupid not to consider it.
And the 10% for a trainer, regardless, is still quite handy in the Everest there.
Oh, 100%, Tim, but the majority of trainers would say this, I hadn't even thought about that, and the horse always comes first. If he puts his hand up after the Manikato and says, I've had enough, I won't be going to the well once too often, that's for sure.
And on to other matters, Troy. You stepped up as the Australian Trainers Association president. I guess, bracing politics at the best of times is difficult in trying to unite trainers all on the same page. Talk us through that process and how you're enjoying it.
Yeah, it's something that I'm extremely passionate about, and I've been on the ATA board for well over 10 years now, and I think I've been the vice president to Robbie for the past 5. And some time ago, Robbie mentioned that he was thinking about stepping down, and I was very keen to take up the role because I think that I do love horse racing, and I think that I've got a genuine, real feel for the game, and I think that it's now become bigger than I think probably the ATA might have just been a bit of a whinging sounding board 5 years ago, and I think that everything has changed quite dramatically, especially with the new management board on RVL, and it gives me a lot of confidence that I know that we have a voice and we are being heard.
Yeah. What are the biggest issues, Troy? What are the what's your top 5 sort of list? You look at it and go, what are the things we need to confront as a group of trainers?
Yeah, I think so. We've got a terrific committee at the moment, Bren, and there's 7 of us on it, and we also have Calvin McAvoy in a consultative position on there as well. And I think that we've got several issues moving forward. Obviously, we need to get bums on seats. So we need people not only coming to the races, but we need people betting on the races. And we need to make sure that everybody is very comfortable with that. I think we've got a lot more competition than we had 10 years ago. And I think it's a real challenge for us moving forward. So I'd say it's number 1 on our priority list. We need to sit back and work out what the punters want, what these guys want, and what they want to look at, and what they want to bet on, and what they need. And I think that's probably the number 1 on our list at the moment.
A regular talking point is the scale of trainers' businesses now. We all know Chris Waller and Kieran Mare, and good luck to them. But do you see that scale is it a necessity? We've had Will Friedman on previously, or would you like to see a cap on trying to spread the horses around, I guess, and the owners probably as well?
I think it's a bit of a defeatist attitude, Tim. Like, do I sit back and wish that I had as many in work as Chris Waller and Kieran Mare? Yeah, of course I do. I'd love that. But it probably makes me to strive, how do I change my business to possibly get better numbers and bigger numbers? And how can you seriously sit back and say, we're going to cap numbers? All right, Chris Waller, sorry, Ozzy Kahir, you're not allowed to have your horse with Kieran Mare or Chris Waller because they've got too many in there already. You can't do that. It's a restriction of trade, and I think it goes against the Australian spirit. So what we need to do is get better. We need to, promote ourselves better, and at the end of the day, not everybody's going to want their horse with the large-scale trainers, and that's why that we are still in business. So I think that for me to sit back and say, oh, no, we should be capping their numbers, I think it's a defeatist attitude that we shouldn't have. So, would I like more? 100% I would. Who's that up to? It's up to me to try and get more.
When you talk to the trainers group, you talk to the other trainers, is there a sense of being a profession that in 5 to 10 years' time will have fewer and fewer members, Troy? I mean, are you concerned by the fact, obviously, we talk about scale, and one aspect of scale is obviously some stables grow and then at the bottom end things disappear. Is there a concern amongst your group that training as a profession is going to become for fewer and fewer people?
It's dropped off, Bren. So we're seeing that in the ATA numbers. It is dropping down, and I think trainers in Victoria, we had 900, and we're down to about 815 at the moment. So that obviously is a drop. Now, is that because of cost of living and the way that the market has gone over the last 2 years? I'm not sure. I can't sit back and say this is why those trainers have got out of the game, and I don't know exactly why that has been. Is it an issue? I'm not sure. I think if it continues to drop, maybe it's something that we need to address and look at, or maybe it's just a leveling out and not as many people are taking as much of a risk.
The ATO remit, Troy, is an interesting one. You don't sort of have a foothold in New South Wales, even though it's, ATO's class as a national body. Does that impact your ability to achieve, things nationally?
It's, again, a good question, Tim, but in fact, we actually have 80 members that are on the ATA still, so they're also part of the New South Wales Trainers Association. But we still have 80 members in New South Wales, and I think Stephen Bell, our CEO, told me the other day that we still have 85% of the runners in New South Wales that are ATA members. So although we're not as loud or at the forefront in New South Wales, it's something that we are very open to, and we still deal with quite a few New South Wales trainers that come to us with questions and needs. So it's something that we are very open to, and far be it for me to sit back and say that the New South Wales Trainers Association aren't doing a good job. So I think there's a place for both of us.
I guess the rest of the industry often sees the ATA in action when there are issues, Troy, that that there's a problem or whatever else, that things come out. But it's fair to say you guys do a lot of day-to-day work within the industry, within trainers to sort of work with them and help them with what you're doing, don't you?
Yeah, 100%. And that's basically what we're here for. And I know that the guys in the office, they're flat out. They're busy every day. I'm speaking to Stephen Bell, our CEO, 2, 3, 4 times a day, and sometimes at length. So there's plenty going on and there's plenty to deal with. So we've just got to get in there and heads down and bums up and keep going.
Roy, you've got an interesting business model to a degree, obviously working in with Baystone, and you've got another draft sort of heading up to the 2-year-old sales. How are they coming together and managing that? It is, I imagine, quite a valuable part of your business.
Yeah, it's really good, Tim, and we've had a few good results. I think so. This year we're trading 18 horses out of the stable and I think there's probably 90% that Dean Harvey, who is Baystone, and I own. So it is a massive part of our business, and it allows us to just have a bit of a go and have a crack and see if we can trade a few horses and make a bit of extra money that way. So it funds the rest of the trading business for the rest of the year. But I think that it's really changed. I think when we came into it originally, I think we've been doing it for about 8 years. And we started and we'd get our horses and we'd make sure that they breezed really fast. And I quickly learned out that that's not a way, because if the horse passes in and we get the horse, and all of a sudden you've got a horse that wants to reef and tear and doesn't want to be a racehorse. So we changed our model about 5 years ago, and I think it's been the best thing ever. So I just treat them all like racehorses. They're not like breeze up horses. And we treat them like that. And if we get them to the trials before they go to the breeze ups, fantastic. And if they breeze up in, 1180 or 1210 or something like that, Tim, as long as they look good and they're going well, that's all we need, because we're trying to turn them into future racehorses.
And you have had some nice horses come through, and obviously disappointing, but Bitter Creek was a good one, and obviously last year the Written Tycoon filly that you traded a year long bought back. She's very talented, obviously with Kieran Maher now, but very talented filly as well.
She's outstanding, and she's favourite in the Captain Teebs on Saturday, and there will be no one cheering for a Kieran Maher horse louder than Troy Corstens, I can tell you, which is very, very rare. And if anyone's watching me at the track and they see me cheering for Signature Set, that's why. But I want it because I labelled her very early, and I did think that she was an unbelievable racehorse, and just her attitude and everything like that, Tim. And I desperately tried to get as many people as I could to buy her. I just couldn't afford her, unfortunately. And we are of the model, Dean and I, that we want to sell everything. I don't want to be seen as keeping the good ones. So we put them out there and we sell them. And hopefully in the future, I can buy the majority of the ones that I want to back. But at the moment, I can't afford it.
Troy, do you see that the fact that you've obviously branched out your business, which taking it back to that broader conversation around trainers, do you think that's just got to become part of what trainers need to do? They need to find other ways apart from the traditional training model of getting winners and getting owners and all that sort of stuff to bring people in and make it work. It's just the nature of the game these days. Diversification will actually help if you can't compete at that scale level.
Spot on. And you need to adapt, Bren, which I think that the majority of trainers do nowadays. So I've literally just got out of a meeting and luncheon, and Graham Begg, Wayne Hawkes, Peter Moody, and myself were all there, and we were talking about how much we all charge, and we're talking about what wages we pay ourselves and everything like that. And everyone thinks that it's fantastic and we're really expensive, but there's not a hell of a lot in it. And unless you get to those scales, or you do something a little bit different and adapt and maybe change and trade a few horses if you can, I think that's a really good way to survive. So it allows me to be able to do that. And then I've got a solid training base of horses coming through that obviously I still want to get really good results, because I can tell you I sold a filly for $1 million last year, but it wasn't as good as the feeling as Barracuda winning a Group 1.
Terrific, Troy. Thank you so much for your time. Appreciate you talking to us on Straight Talk, and all the best for the spring.
Keep up the good work, boys. I've got to say, since you guys have been doing what you're doing, I love it, and it's fantastic. I read it as much as I can, and you're doing a great job. Well done.
Thanks, Troy. The following segment is brought to you by Inglis. The strongest collection of sire power ever, assembled for an Australian 2-year-old sale, will be offered at the Inglis Ready to Race sale on Thursday, October 16th. A catalogue of 222 lots has been finalised for the auction and is now available on the Inglis website. The Inglis Ready to Race sale is easily the best and most progressive 2-year-old sale in the country. It has provided over 800 individual winning graduates since 2016 at an average earning per runner of over $111,000, with 35% higher than its nearest rival. It is also the highest winners to runners ratio of any Southern Hemisphere Breeze Up sale. Breeze Ups will be held at Warwick Farm, Taupo and Wangaratta ahead of the sale, with vision uploaded to the Inglis website. Check out the catalogue at inglis.com.au. On to breeding now, Tim, and this week we bid farewell to Fastnet Rock. We got word through on Monday that the great champion son of Dane Hill, massively influential sire in Australia and overseas, his time on this earth come to an end, sadly enough. He was euthanised early on this week. He's amazing record, Tim. Like people probably don't realise how good he was. And there's the number one headline stat is no Australian bred horse has ever produced as many Group 1 winners. 44 Group 1 winners. It's more than Reduced Choice. It's more than the modern champion Snitzel and I'm Invincible. Yeah, he was a remarkably good racehorse, who became a phenomenal stallion, didn't he, Tim?
I've got his stats open here, as you said, 44 Group 1 winners, but a lot of, over a long period of time, started with a bang. His first crop, Australian or Southern Hemisphere crop, had 13 stakes winners and a lot of good fillies over the time. Obviously, there's Via Cecina at the moment, but Avantage of Tiakau's, Atlantic Jewel, Machine, who's superstar broodmare in Japan these days, Shoals and Sea Siren, but another good broodmare, and Catchy, of course. So, and obviously some great, Merchant Navy winning Royal Ascot and Fox Wedge and even, Buckaroo at the moment, and Awesome Rock with Troy Corstens back in the day. So just a remarkable stallion. And even at the moment, Seamus Mills and Mick Price and Mick Kent Jr. got on display heading to Group 1. So, he has, just by the statistics, sort of tailed off a little bit, which is not unusual for certain stallions, but it's still a very good, still got some good horses out there. And, with his broodmares, he's just a dynamite broodmare sire as well, throws sort of strength into his foals. Yeah, great. And as Tom Magnus said at Coolmore, just sort of they were able to build Coolmore in Australia on the back of him, really. So, great stallion, lost for those people that sort of worked closely with him over the years.
Yeah, 197 stakes winners in total. A remarkable record on both sides. He was the most, him and Exceed and Excel were the two that, probably historically will be seen as the ones that were able to make it in both hemispheres. And there's very, very few horses that can do that from an Australian point of view. And we're looking at now, trying to think, Tim, was there any Australian horse that shuttled this year? I don't think there were there? So, they shuttled in the Northern Hemisphere. So it's interesting. Probably earnings are over $290 million across their careers. Yeah, just a great mark. And you talked before about his daughters and their influence. He's been champion Australian broodmare sire for the last 2 years. I think that'll roll on for another few years yet. Those every time I hear the phrase Fastnet Rock mares, I get James Bester's voice in my head somewhere talking about it. But it's that concept of like a brand of horses. And when you see a Fastnet Rock filly or a Fastnet Rock mare, what they'll look like. They're powerful, they're strong, and remarkable legacy. But Deepfield also left a legacy, a quite strong legacy in the Australian landscape, unfortunately cut short by fertility issues. Tim, and you had a story this week that the insurance payment around that, he's short, the shortening of his career has certainly hit a few snags along the way. We're 3 years hence, and still no money forthcoming.
It's an interesting one that it costs a lot of money to insure horses. It can be just a normal mare or a foal might be 4% annually of the value, so a lot of money. And Stallion's obviously worth a lot of money, and he was on the rise. Deepfield, obviously 4-time champion Hong Kong sire, and it was interesting. His fertility did fall off a cliff really, and only 7 foals in his last crop, serving 60-odd mares, I think it was. It's interesting that I'm led to believe the insurance underwriters refused to pay because they believed the fertility was, or lack of poor fertility was caused by, I guess, overwork. He did serve a lot of mares over his time. That'd be interesting if it was challenged in court. Is there any veterinary evidence to actually support that? I'm not a vet, and I have heard that there isn't, but don't hold me to that. It's an interesting one. Like this industry, there's a lot of good old horse people will say yes, that's what's caused it, but to actually prove that with veterinary science is another thing altogether. So whether it ever gets resolved or the shareholders ever get paid out, everyone's very tight-lipped on that story. It's sort of anyone directly connected, either shareholders or obviously Henry Field and the insurer, that sort of some of the brokers that were managing Deepfield won't comment, and that's understandable. But it's an interesting story nonetheless.
Yeah, it does point to the fact that it's a complex business, and if you have you have an insurance background or an insurance sort of backstop behind you with got a champion stallion, it was not always straightforward. So a bit of complexity there, and probably a bit to play out. We might see that one. They said might end up in the courts at this stage, or who knows where it might end up. I wanted to also touch on the remarkable result out of Keeneland this week, Tim. Record breaking. Obviously in America, their biggest yearling sales. It's a massive sale, but oh my goodness, that American market hasn't obviously there's been a bit of a galvanizing effect there and a bit of a rebound, but certainly the write-off provisions provided in the most recent, President Trump's one big beautiful bill, which allowed pretty much automatic write-off of bloodstock costs. It's just had an absolute sugar hit effect on the industry. $52 million yearlings already, I think we're 4 days into the sale. Young sire Gunrunner has had $12 million lot so far. And what we're seeing here, Tim, is not just the big boys slugging it out the top, paying $10 million for a horse. We're seeing everyone raise up, and particularly, the more $1 million horses and all those sort of aspects. It tends to be a transformative moment for American bloodstock, and, it's probably, going to change the face of American racing, American bloodstock moving forward.
Well, and it is an international sale as well. Japan's been very strong, buying gun runners, and Justify's been popular in Japan. So, and Flightline, the first crop of Flightline, I think it is, unbeaten 6 from 6, and some of his wins were had to be seen to be believed, and they've been popular in the ring. Obviously, throwing nice types, and he'll be very marketable. Obviously, and whether some of the Australian lobbyists can get to the federal government for tax advantages here, that maybe that's an avenue, but I'm not sure the Australian government has quite that appetite to support the industry in that way.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly it's changed the direction of the industry in that regard. It's interesting. Tim and I spoke before. You and I spoke before about the effective race for the Crown, the Netflix series, and the concept around the Triple Crown and the importance of it. We're going right back to the start of this podcast. The changes to the calendar proposed for New South Wales would give them a Group 1 sprinting Triple Crown. And I reckon, knowing the personalities involved, the marketability of having a spring Triple Crown in Sydney would be an enormous incentive to get that over the line. So, yeah, I just get the feeling that affects. We're going to look at the fact. Let's go back to the fact. Peter V'landys unashamedly says the idea of the Everest was borrowed from what happened at the Pegasus World Cup. Now, the Pegasus World Cup fell over. Well, it hasn't fallen over, but it's fallen firmly off the perch, while the Everest has gone from from strength to strength. If you can put the Everest at the center of that and you have two Group 1s either side of it, it just changes the whole nature. So I think there's much more at play here than just, we want a Group 1 and you want a Group 1 or whatever else with this play. I think it does that. And I think hooking that back to what happens in America, it's obviously a market that PVL is very familiar with. So anyway, we'll see how that pans out. The following segment is brought to you by Darley. We've talked about emerging stallions. Now let me throw another one into the mix. Native Trail. Breeders can stop calling him the best looking stallion on the Darley roster. And that's on top of being a champion 2-year-old and a classic winner at 3. The scary part, his foals are just as sharp looking as he is. Like Too Darn Hot all over again, but with his own twist. Native Trail has the looks, the race record, and now the foals to back it up. And he's staring you right in the face. Native Trail, standing at Darley Kelvin side for $27,500, including GST. Right now, Tim, moving on to wagering, and obviously we had a really interesting couple of days in Melbourne at the Backing the Punt conference under Chatham House rules, which the conference operated under. We can talk about what happened at the conference. You just can't say who said what, apart from what they said to us at the bar on Tuesday night. It was a really interesting couple of days, Tim, like valuable in different ways. You get to talk to not just to the big guys in the industry and whatever else, but a lot of people who just operate day to day within the wagering space and the racing space as well. Some interesting conversations had. You made a brief appearance there last year, Tim, but this year was probably your first time being there across both days. What did you take out of it?
Was I think, quite positive in listening to you, and I did attend briefly last year. There seems to be a bit of a renewed confidence that the markets or the industry, certainly from a wagering perspective, is on the up a little bit after declines, and that they're, despite the no certainty over the you win some, you lose more reforms from federally, that they're pushing ahead, and to some of the marketing avenues from my perspective, having not heard them before, they might be obvious to some of our listeners, of course, but the dabbles and them trying to compete against the big guys like sports bets, and even the innovation of what sports bets got to come, and trying to stay at, as market leader, and Tabcorp as well, sort of trying to, it's interesting that they had a few speakers there, that I don't think they were quite as present last year, and they seem to, well, obviously their share price shows that they're on the up as well.
Yeah, it was interesting. I think Picklebet was also very interesting to hear sort of their plays as well. Obviously, that racing space with racetrack sponsorship and sort of where they're working on. I think Tab's going through a major change, or have gone through a major change, and still are. Like, Michael Fitzsimmons was at the conference, who's their head of wagering, obviously UK background and come through Hong Kong. It'll be really interesting to see what hold he gets. I think he's only been in the job about 6 weeks. I think we'll see some developments in that space. As you mentioned, Sportsbet are moving towards a few different innovations in the racing space, including fixed odds exotics, which they've kind of had before, but probably not at that level. And anyway, I'm interested to see how that plays out. I know Bet are putting some things into the market around their racing product as well, which could be interesting as well. So there's a bit going on. It does seem like, from my perspective, it's a bit more positive, as you said, a bit more a positive feel. It's probably based upon the fact we reported earlier this week on the Strait that the federal government looks like they're finally moving on at least the first step of those wagering reforms around advertising and what they may look like. The likelihood is perhaps the online aspect of the ban won't be as strong as they thought it might be, but maybe free-to-air TV might be stronger. If your aim is to stop kids seeing gambling ads, you and I both got kids, Tim. Like, seriously, they're not watching free-to-air TV. But anyway, I won't try to double guess the government on that, but it seems like an odd approach. But anyway, they're pushing through that. And I think politically it's probably a lot easier for the government to get that to go through, because I think they will probably get bipartisan support from the opposition to actually get that stuff through. So that will help as well. The other aspect, Tim, which is interesting, is live in-play betting. And obviously Tabcorp are running this trial at the moment in venue with their live in-play sports betting, where you can use your app, tap it on a terminal, and rather than have to bet, cash through a terminal or a betting terminal or go to the counter, you can actually just bet on your app in venue. Now, it's only happened in a couple of venues in Sydney at the moment. It's only a trial. It probably hasn't set the world on fire, but they've been able to test out all their sort of technology and whatever else. But what was interesting is that a couple of the other bookmakers saying they were cheering on Tabcorp because they want to see live in-play betting in Australia. Now, of course, pretty much almost everywhere else in the world you can bet in-play live. You can't do it in Australia on the Interactive Gambling Act. But that would be a significant boost for the bookies. I'm interested to hear your thoughts, Tim. I've had a couple of emails since the article I wrote a couple of days ago came out saying it might not be quite the boon for racing that people think. And in fact, for the smaller codes, greyhounds and harness, it actually could be a bit of a killer blow because people would just bet in play on sport rather than betting on, product-based harness and greyhound racing.
That's my take as well, Bren, that yes, it would probably, well, it would certainly boost sports turnover, whether that money's taken from racing or whether you can have the opposite view that more people are engaged in sport and therefore will come across to racing at some point it certainly will boost turnover. And so I still think is a long way to go from Tabcorp's in play testing and sort of, right up to everyone being carte blanche, everyone having a crack at it. We know Sportsbet tried to circumvent the laws at one stage and that got knocked on the head and different things. So there's a lot of talk about, black and grey markets at the wagering conference. And I think if the government doesn't go that way, eventually people will start betting online, or they already do, in play elsewhere on illegal markets. So prohibition, as someone else said, isn't the answer, and I'm of that opinion as well.
Yeah, and I think that's probably what changes the emergence of those markets. And, former Racing Queensland CEO Jason Scott made the remark to us both in the conference and at the bar on Tuesday night that Sportsbet's now only the third biggest bookie on Collins Street because Stake and Shuffle, who operate in that grey market, whether they operate to Australians or not is a note of contention, not legally allowed to do so, but they are massive. They've delved into massive companies and massive industries and changing the nature of it. And I think that there is a real sense of frustration about the amount of regulation that the Australian industry is under compared to these guys being able to operate in a different market. Whether they're targeting Australian customers or not, that's a point of contention, but certainly other overseas bookmakers definitely are. And it's pretty straightforward to set up a VPN, set up a deposit and count, and away you go, without all the consumer protection and AML requirements and all that sort of stuff that goes with it. So that's probably a concern of the industry. I'm not doing the bookies bidding there. That's just the nature of them being concerned about them, and probably the challenge is back to them to make sure they can offer a product. And part of that is that in play aspect. Well, that's it for Stroke Talk this week. Bumper edition brought to you by our great sponsors, Inglis and Daly. Don't forget to give us a rating wherever you're listening to our podcast, and be sure to subscribe. Send us an email, editor@thestrake.com.au, or through our DMs or whatever else, and ask us a few questions. We'll be back again next week to talk things all racing, wagering and breeding. Thanks for joining us.